Coming up on the Up and Up.
Be daring, like have a polite, daring attitude. And if you think, oh, that person is too high up, I cannot reach out, I cannot, just do it.
What I ask myself is, does the industry really want to change? Would these larger, bigger companies really be open to being a bit more fair and sustainable in their practices?
If we want something as cheap as possible, if we want something for Black Friday that costs us almost nothing, somebody else is going to have to feel the price cut.
Mm-hmm.
Hey there, risers and thrivers. I'm your host, Janine, and this is On the Up and Up. Here, we've created a safe space to get real, make connections, and share stories that matter. No gatekeeping, no filters, just the truth. Welcome to On the Up and Up. And before we jump into this episode, it would mean the world to me if you would just take a second to like, follow, and subscribe to this podcast on your favorite streaming and social media channel. Also, a huge thank you to our partners at Factory Network for providing us with this incredible space to record this conversation. Now, to this episode. Joining me for this conversation is a revolutionary that is leading a major change in the coffee industry, Maura Oerding, who is a founder, inventor, and currently the CEO of the Kaffee Kooperative, where she is driving innovation, equality, and sustainability through her vision to empower women to live self-determined lives and develop their full potential through economic independence. Fun fact, did you know that only 7% of all patents in the world belong to women? Well, Maura is one of those patent holders. So, without further ado, welcome to the podcast and thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me today.
So glad to have you on the podcast. And with these conversations, I really love to just dive right into the topic. And so as I sit here smelling my coffee and about to have the first sip of satisfaction, I wanted to ask you, what is that one thing that the coffee industry just has not managed to do yet?
That's a very good question to start with. So coffee is historically a colonial product. So it is not a local plant in most countries that grow coffee today. And so what happened at that time was that colonial powers actually forced people to work for that cash crop that was coffee. And so they controlled the market, the best coffee plantations or the land, essentially. And what happened after that was that sort of big corporations took over. So there was sort of a switch in power, but there was not really a real systemic change. So, of course, most corporations do not hire slaves, but the working conditions have not changed to an extent that we can say we're happy with that. People are being paid a fair wage. People are not suffering from poverty, and people are not being exploited and living in dependency, essentially. So we are not there yet. And that's the one thing that obviously needs to change, but after decades, after centuries after, we are still battling with these same issues.
Yeah. I think my question is, why do we still battle with this? And is it even something that people realize we're battling, right? Is there even a battle? Because if few people don't know there's something that you need to be fighting against. Yeah. That's where I wonder, because even for me, like, we're diving into the conversation now. I'm like, but why hasn't it changed? And for me, as the consumer who's drinking my cup of coffee in the morning, it's not exactly top of mind.
Yeah.
So why?
Yeah.
What's this battle?
That's a really good question, especially the second part of your question. Maybe to ask it as a question to you, when was the last time or the first time that you thought about this topic?
Honestly, maybe when you brought it up to me. I think it was maybe also, if I'm really honest, back in my bachelor's, I was looking into fair trade as a topic, but I looked at it from a more fashion and clothing sustainability part and never from a production side, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, honestly, not really. I never really thought about it, just vaguely.
Same for me, actually. Before I started to work at the Kaffee Kooperative, I didn't even know most of it. So as a consumer, mostly the journey of our food starts and ends at the supermarket. while we stand there, of course, a lot of us are more try to pay more attention, are more mindful with what we actually consume, what the products are. We might look at labels like fair trade, for instance, as you mentioned, but most of us don't know very much about that. And honestly, it is kind of a hard task to put onto consumers. But if corporations do not sort of take initiative in making this better and really driving a real change, it sort of is on us as consumers. And so I think that that's the biggest part where the problem lies. Most people don't know it. And then on the other side, there are people who have been profiting from it for very long, up to a point where these people or these corporations can control entire markets. And so if that world breaks down for them, that's obviously not something they're interested in. And a lot would have to change for people to consistently get better wages, for them to also get the recognition for their work. Because right now what happens in the coffee industry is that most of the farmers are smallholder farmers. So they're farmers who have small lands that they cultivate, and then they have their certain amount of yield that they get from their coffee crop. And so these are very dependent on those big corporations to buy off their coffee at the cheapest stage, which is then the green bean. And then they never know what happens to their coffee. Who is it going to be Nestle, or is it going to be Dahlmeier or whoever? The value chain ends there for them. But then the part where you get the biggest chunk of the money off is after the coffee has been refined, after it has been roasted, after it has been packaged and branded. And that's where you have that value, that exponential value, growth and value, which they will never see. And so this is the really big problem, that fair trade, for instance, is a really big or a really good basis to build on, but it also ends there. So it's a basis that we need to have to build on, then we also have to move on from there.
And does it feel like we're moving on from there? Because to me, it seems like it's just fair trade, and that's that.
That's how the market operates right now. There is non-fair trade, and there is fair trade, and then there is fair chain. And this is essentially what we are doing, what the Kaffee Kooperative is doing, which means that we do not buy off the coffee in its cheapest state as a green bean, but we have the farmers be in control of the not only planting and harvesting, but then the next steps as well of refining it, of having it roasted and packaged and branded, and them owning the brand themselves. So these farmers are no longer just farmers, they're now business women. I say women because it's a women coffee in our case, because women traditionally have done around 70% of the hard work on the fields and have not seen very much of that money, so still living in dependency. And what we then saw, if women do get the money or do get the chance to be their own entrepreneurs, not only coffee farmers, they invest in their children, they invest in their communities, they invest in education, in educating themselves as well. And that's something very beautiful that you see in the corporations as well, that we work with, the women corporations. And so this is sort of the fair chain, the idea behind fair chain, that you give the control back to the people who are the most important in the value chain, which sometimes we forget standing in the supermarket. Yes. We are the most important person. Exactly. Or if you hear of a local roastery, we here in Germany, there's no way we can have a local roastery, because if you say that, you're cutting off the person or the people who are the most important of the value chain, who are responsible for us having coffee here.
That's such a hot take. That's such a hot take to think about, because I mean, how many cutesy little coffee shops do we have all over Berlin? And so when you say it like that, it's like, well, yeah, actually, you're just cutting off an entire part and not even acknowledging it. That's it. That's what makes me also wonder about the cause and the business behind this, because it feels like a David and Goliath battle, to be honest. On one hand, I understand why the consumer should be the ones who want to make a change and push the change. But at the same time, I feel like and I'm talking from a consumer perspective, there are so many causes that we have to fight right now.
Absolutely.
That sometimes a part of me as a consumer is like, is this really the battle? Especially one, because it feels like it's so out of touch to me and my reality. And so maybe if you could bring it down to a ground level, why should I as a consumer care? And what could I realistically do as a consumer besides say, it should be fair chain. It should be more fair trade. So what could I really do as a consumer?
Yeah. It's two really important things that you mentioned. First, the fighting the battle. Is that really our battle to fight? And why should we care? Maybe to start with the last part, why should we care? We're all in this together. And if we as consumers sort of don't take responsibility in making the right decisions, consumer decisions, there's somebody else on the other side of the planet who is going to feel that consequence. So, meaning if we want something as cheap as possible, if we want something for Black Friday that costs us almost nothing, somebody else is going to have to feel the price cut. And so we're all connected in that way. And also, if we're talking, for instance, about our climate crisis, if we don't care, somebody else is going to feel the consequence. And this is exactly what the women on the fields, for instance, are seeing. They are actually confronted season after season with the consequences of the environmental crisis. And so they are having to come up with solutions on how to better optimize their plants, their plantations, what other coffee crops to plant that are well or better adapted to the climate change. And so this is something that if that goes wrong, it's not just their fault, it's also our fault. And so really we need to be a team in that. So why should we care? Because if you don't care, somebody else is going to feel it. Exact same thing goes back. If somebody else doesn't care, you are going to feel it. And so if we do that first step of realizing that, then we actually see why we should care. And then the beautiful thing about the system in fair chain, if you give back the control, is that the women can actually say, okay, we need to start focusing on a more sustainable way of actually working on our fields. We have to create more biodiversity. We need to educate ourselves more in that to make this entire business more sustainable for us and also along the value chain. And then that would mean, because the women have the power and the education and the means for that, we do not have to fight a battle. We just have to make a very conscious consumer decision. So that's our battle, is really just in the way we consume. You drinking a coffee right now, people drinking fair chain coffee in Germany are already fighting this battle just by consuming the right coffee, the right product. So essentially there is a change that needs to be done. We need to redirect or change the power dynamics and give control back to the people who actually cultivate or produce our food and drinks and everything we consume, and so that they can actually educate themselves in making the entire value chain more sustainable. And for that, they actually need to know the entire value chain, which in the standard, I would call it, actual coffee business as it is right now, a smallholder farmer is never going to know the entire value chain, because he is cut off or she is cut off at the point where it should actually start for her.
Interesting. I think what's really eye-opening about what you just said, it's really just comes down to your purchasing decision. You don't need to be out having a whole demonstration and creating a huge hoopla hoop about this. It's literally just buy more fair.
Yes.
And that already has a ripple effect. And what also got me and gave me a bit of an aha moment about what you just said is, if you're fighting for feminism, if you're fighting against the patriarchy, if you want to see good climate change action happen, great. It's as simple as just buying the right coffee or so-called right coffee, but it's as simple as buying fair coffee.
Yes.
It starts there. And this is from a consumer perspective, but then my mind goes into the industry perspective. And so what I ask myself is, does the industry really want to change? And maybe this is coming from an economic standpoint, but then I wonder to myself, would these larger, bigger companies really be open to being a bit more fair and sustainable in their practices? Because would it drastically eat at their margins where they wouldn't perform the same anyway? So that's the question. These larger companies that are enjoying the colonial structures as they are, do they want to change?
Yeah, fair question. I think it's really hard to look at. Also in coffee, it's still very traditional or still very colonially influenced. But it's hard to look at the industry as a whole because actually there's new generations stepping up now and also in those large companies. And you see that there are people, not everyone is the same also in the coffee industry or in large corporations. And there are a lot of smart people there. And so I like to look at the bright side and like to look at the potential and like to believe that there's a lot of people who actually see the potential. But I think what's very important is that we can also not wait for the entire generation of people who have been doing it that way to sort of get out of business. We cannot wait for that. But what I'm trying to say is that we need to collaborate. So the bright minds who are trying to change it need to work together with the consumers. And so there's no way that the responsibility can be only on one side, and either on one side or either on the other side. So it really has to be a collaboration between the consumers, the corporations, and then the farmers producing the product. And so I do think, and this is actually my work and what we are doing with the Kaffee Kooperative, is showing people that this is something that can work. And for us, a really big thing is we started in Rwanda. Now we are actually working with 2,000 female farmers, and we expanded to Uganda. So our first international corporation, which we are very excited about, where we created a blend between Arabica from Rwanda and Robusta from Uganda. And so with that, we're showing that it is possible. And so what we really want is for people to see that, for corporations to see that, and you see big corporations taking on a women coffee for Women's Day or a fair traded coffee for, I don't know, as opposed to participating in Black Friday.
And I really like the point that you're pushing or pointing out, which is collaboration. So it's definitely not one specific unit or one, whether it's the industry or the farmers or the consumer that's going to make the difference by themselves.
Yes.
It really becomes a collective thing. And I do imagine, and maybe this is me just being very optimistic, that the more consumers push and purchase in a certain way, the more likely old industry is to follow suit, because they'll start realizing, why are we not earning as much? But these ones who are doing it more fair are getting more money. Okay, maybe we need to create our own fair line. And so it inevitably will create this waterfall, snowball effect that others will also get involved in it. And so you've already pretty much alluded to it with a bit of what you're doing at your company. But I also wanted to ask, first of all, how did the coffee co-op come to be? To begin with, and how are you all really doing it differently? You've mentioned a little bit here and there, you've alluded so far, but let's dive into that. So how did it come to be first?
So the Kaffee Kooperative started with Ellen and Xava, my colleagues, the two founders. And Ellen is originally from Uganda and Xava's from Germany. And they met and were working on a project in Rwanda. And it was also an environmental project they were working with. And so the first thing for them to always take home when they were going back to Germany was to give to their friends was real good Rwandan coffee. Nice. And they noticed, hey, there's such good coffee here in the supermarkets. And people are so happy. All of our friends love this coffee. Why can't they sell it in Germany as well? Why can't these farmers and cooperatives sell their coffee in the European market? And back then, when the Kaffee Kooperative started, the biggest brand, or one of the biggest brand, was already sort of formed and organized in a cooperative, so that you had several smallholder farmers being part of a cooperative, which is a very great organization actually to have, and a very great system, because First of all, it gives you so much more power if you collaborating together. There we are again. And then second of all, if there is a need for education, for instance, there's always a way to get in the expertise. You can just face this, as you said, David and Goliath battle in a completely different way. And if you're just a smallholder farmer, it just makes you so much more dependent on so many different factors, which the cooperatives give a very good solution for. And so they said, okay, let's go to one of these cooperatives. Let's talk to the people there, ask them how we can do it. And then they met the very first woman who was the managing director at a cooperative in Rwanda, and very much one of the only ones in the African continent at that point to manage a cooperative as a woman. And she actually started as the daughter of one of the farmers, then became an accountant and worked her way up until she became the managing director. And that woman, Angelique is her name, had a talk with Alan and Xava, and they saw, okay, this is how it works. This is how it looks like on a field. And then they saw that a lot of women were working there. And Angelique said, I have that idea of creating a women coffee, and why don't we do it together? And so that sort of came the collaboration. We call ourselves a German-African social business because we work at an eye-level corporation. So we have our partners on site, which is Angelique, and she's also the name giver of the Angelique's Finest Coffee. Which she was actually very shy about at the beginning, but it was really the best decision. And right now, it's a brand that the farmers own. It's a brand that the farmers can say in their communities, hey, do you know that country called Germany? People drink Angelique's Finest there. And through that collaboration with Angelique, Ellen, and Xava, the Kaffee Kooperative sort of formed the market or created the bridge of market participation to the German and European market, essentially, for that female-owned coffee.
That's super cool. And that's such a really lovely origin story. And where I asked the question as well as, so how does it actually work for the farmers then? So how do they actually now end up having more complete control over the coffee? What exactly does that look like? And maybe cross comparing with the standard a bit more, because I'm still wrapping my head around it a bit.
Yeah. Before I jump into that, to sort of from the bridge from what I just said, Xava and Ellen, obviously as the names maybe might also already give away, are two men. And so what I find very important about that, it's not that we look at things as a me problem or a you problem, which is exactly the same thing that we talked about. Is this something the consumer has to care about? Why should I care? And this is also what happens at the Angelique's Finest Coffee and at the cooperatives where the women work. The men are always included, the husbands are always included. And so it's not like, what are the women doing behind closed doors? What are you doing with our wives, our daughters, nieces, and everything? But we also call it's a gender coffee. It's not just women coffee, but it's something that we all drive forward together as no matter what gender we are, to create change together, to create a better future together, and to close gaps that have been there for way too long.
And that's such a good point that you bring up, actually. And we can go back to my other question in a second. But in a time where it feels like the gender divide between men and women is constantly becoming higher and higher, it feels like oftentimes this is a woman's cause, these are men's causes, and there's no overlap. And female founders should only found things that have to do with women, and God forbid a man is trying to solve that. No, stay in your lane. So I actually think it's really beautiful because they have the power and the privilege to solve a problem, and they chose to be able to extend that into a cause that maybe is not necessarily one-to-one with something they can relate to, but they could see that there was a problem.
Absolutely.
And that's beautiful.
Yeah, and that was really a human problem that was solved through a human connection and human collaboration, which is what we do at the Kaffee Kooperative, and which is actually the only way to go, because everything else I find is a waste of time if we don't come together, if we are working for something and not against something or against each other. That's for us at the Kaffee Kooperative really the only way to go.
Yeah, for sure. And it's really beautiful. And that's exciting. I'm glad that there's you all working and doing this and setting a precedent that it does work. Yes. And that's also why I also wanted to dive a bit more into the farmers aspect of it, because we talked about the consumer, we talked about the industry, we talked about the origin, but now the farmers, the ones who are really grinding in the background. How does what you're building in your company and Angelique's Finest help to give them more control over the coffee?
Maybe to contrast the cooperative idea and a maybe independent single smallholder farmer. As I said, sort of the competitors we're looking at are the really big corporations. So the corporations who can actually go and influence prices of an entire market. So, and obviously if you as a sole farmer, first of all, you're going to have your own experience. Probably the land has been handed over generation by generation, and you probably have a lot of expertise and experience in your own family already. However, this is also a very dynamic market, and there's constantly new challenges that these farmers need to face, as I mentioned already as well, the climate change. And so if you have a cooperative that really gives a room or creates a structure where all of these problems can be solved together. It's not that you need to go out and do the field research yourself and looking how is that farmer doing that, does that work? And that's like one of the most practical benefits for them as well, to have that big resource of knowledge, a knowledge pool to rely on. But then also looking at the financial side, if you are a smallholder farmer, it would be very, very hard for you to be in coffee fair chain business, because that would mean that you start your coffee harvest around March, April, and then all the way until March, April, May, or June, you sort of do your harvest, and then you need to wash your coffee, which is sort of the first step. You need to sort your coffee. You need to then, well, first actually you need to remove the husk from, or the cherry outer top, and you have those many steps that you need to go through before you can roast your coffee, before you can refine your coffee, then package it. And that's a lot of months that go by without you seeing a penny of money. And that's also, these processes are also very costly. And then you as a farmer in Rwanda, for instance, you have one harvest a year. And that puts you in front of a lot of difficulties. A lot of pressure. And during that time, you sort of have to make money. You need to be able to provide for your family. And so what the difference is with a cooperative is that is bundled, and that, for instance, things like pre-financing the coffee before it's sold at the market become a thing that's possible for everyone. And that's what happens. So they harvest their coffee, and after bringing the coffee to the cooperative, they get the first pay. So along the step, they have several different pays, and they get the second pay when the coffee is going to be shipped. Then they get the third pay when the coffee is being sold in Germany. And so that all of a sudden creates an entirely different perspective for them, and it creates a stable income from which they can exactly in consistent cash flow, and also an income of which they make use of to diversify this income, because they only have one harvest a year. And then at the cooperatives, the women meet once a month, and then problems are gathered together, are discussed. And this then creates the third, or one more advantage, is that you have a community around you. That when you have a problem, it's most likely that you're not the only one who has that problem, and you're going to see that, you're going to feel that, and you're going to solve it together. And that's something that obviously does not happen if you are as an outside smallholder farmer, or even if you are a farmer who is not a smallholder farmer who has a lot of land. But you're still not going to have the power of a community and of a cooperative if you're not part of one. All of that is very, very difficult to do as a single person or a single farmer family. And that's why we really value those cooperatives, and that's why we do our best to drive that concept forward.
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful thing. There's one thing that I feel like I consistently have been learning since having the podcast, since interviewing entrepreneurs, and it's always the power of a community.
Yes.
It's always the power of collaboration, the power of creating partnerships. Yeah. It's really not about competition.
Yeah.
If
Absolutely.
you can find a way to collaborate with other people,
yeah.
there's so much strength. Like you said, you're never alone when there's a problem.
Yeah.
That goes on, that you have other people who can help you solve it. Maybe there's other resources you can gather. You don't need to buy all of your own equipment.
Yes.
Because you can share that with other people as well. So
yes.
there's so much strength behind it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you look at how far the cooperatives have come and how far we as a Kaffee Kooperative and our partner Warszawsko in Rwanda have come, this wouldn't have been possible without this concept of the cooperatives sort of having our backs. And it wouldn't be possible that over 2,000 farmers could own one brand and profit off of that and make so much more money because they're selling their own product. Yeah, this wouldn't have been possible.
Yeah, and it's really beautiful to hear. And this is quite a noble cause. It's an impactful cause. Like I said, it leans into so many of the global issues that we think about, whether it's feminism, the patriarchy, climate crisis, making sure that all parts of a value chain are sustainable and fair. And so this is why it brings me to the question of, how did your journey come to becoming the CEO of this coffee co-op and working with Angelique's Finest? How did that happen?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah. Along the way, I asked myself this question as well, because it was not a very linear path, I would say. I don't come from the coffee business. I myself, I'm saying this if your audience can keep a secret, I'm not much of a coffee drinker.
Might have to cut that out. I don't know.
you make use of your good judgment. Yeah, and that's why, lucky for me, it's about more than just coffee. Yeah. But I don't come from coffee. I actually started my journey as an inventor.
That's really cool, actually, because I've never met anyone who's like, I'm an inventor. It's like, what? Super cool.
Yeah. Also trying to change that, to have more inventors out there.
Yes.
But I actually wanted to own my own patents, and I had a lot of ideas, a lot of problems that I wanted to solve through inventions. And so I started sort of trying to find a way that I could finance all that, and then started my own business, my own company, to actually be able to become an official inventor. And
what does it mean to be an official inventor, actually?
Well, if you're an inventor, you essentially invented something that ideally solves a problem, and then you go ahead and you patent that. And here in Germany, it's the Deutsches Patent- und Markenamt, so the Office for Patents and Trademark. And so you go there, and then most of it you do online. But if you have the financial means, you hire a patent attorney, and then the journey begins. And it's quite a ride. It takes a few years if you're lucky. And if you're not lucky, it doesn't work out. But in my case, after 4 years, I had my first patent, and then I went on from there, and was also in this journey where I met a lot of incredible people, and I met a lot of people who were into innovation, people who were into business, and I met a lot of women who actually struggled with similar challenges as myself. And I created.
What would you say those challenges are? What do you mean by that?
I would think that one challenge that would be specific to Germany would be the bureaucracy, just trying to find your work around, because bureaucracy is not something that you want to have as your main job. It's actually the thing that you're trying to get at. And so that was, like, for me, starting off a big challenge, because a lot of these things I didn't learn in school. How to get around German bureaucracy and be successful with your business at the same time. And so this was one of the challenges where I found a lot of support, a lot of people who have been through that. And then also just getting access to so many things, just finding a right contact somewhere. That was starting off, that's always difficult for anyone, I think. And so having a circle of people around you to facilitate that, or even just tell you that they have done it and how they have done it, and just for you to know that it's possible, that was something that I was really looking for. And so I started a female business network, and we were doing essentially just that, looking at problems, finding solutions, and doing that together. And through that, I really just met more and more incredible people and got the chance to speak to a lot of these people, to speak about those topics, women in business, women in innovation. And then a friend of mine who knew the Kaffee Kooperative said that they were looking for a CEO, and we connected, and it sparked instantly. I met the two founders, I met some members of the team, and yeah, it just resonated. The cause just really resonated with the mission that I was on, and I was very excited. I saw the potential immediately, and I was very excited to drive it forward and to put a lot of energy into that. And first of all, it's a great team. Also, the founders that I already talked about and the team itself have created something that is very special. And together we are on our mission to bringing this to the next level. And we have an incredible community behind ourselves. And as you said, the consumer question, do I care? There's so many people who care. And to see that, that's like a source of renewable energy for me, to see how much the people are just also grateful if companies and businesses actually do that first step and then create the groundwork, so that you just have to sit down and grab a cup of coffee, and with every cup you're actually supporting a good cause. So yeah, that's how it all began.
That's really cool. I love that it was a part of just being open to any potential opportunity that came in the way, but it was your curiosity to solve a problem, bring a group of people together, the importance of network, which seems to always also be another topic. So it's always community collaboration that I always hear network and the strength of having that and how that impacts it.
Yeah.
And so what I think to myself is there's oftentimes a lot of younger listeners on the podcast who aspire to one day be the CEO of a company. And so what would your advice be to any young women who are looking up at you and saying, wow, I would love to be in a similar position one day?
That's a really cool question. So for me, one thing is that if you don't know something, learn it. And if you are sure of something, sometimes it's really good to be stubborn. If people are telling you to do otherwise and you're really convinced of something, then just do it. Just run with it and sort of stick to that. Even if you feel like it doesn't make sense, sometimes you just have to stick with something long enough. That's something that I've always done, and people have called me stubborn very often, and I see it as a compliment. And actually, if you have something that you're convinced of, if you have something that you like, just invest in that, go with that, and find allies. Really, people who believe in what you do, or people who believe in your mission. And even if you don't believe in it now, but you know that it's something that makes sense, keep going. And I always thought that if it's a 1 in 100 chance, I just have to do this. Worst case scenario, I do this 99 times, and then I know the 100 is going to be the success, it's going to be the win. And so that's actually what I would say. Just reach out to people. And as you also mentioned before we started recording this podcast, sometimes you just have to put yourself out there. Sometimes you just have to go for it, try. And if it doesn't work, you had a success in a way because you already know what doesn't work. And sometimes that's all you need to know to move forward and build up from there. Yeah,
that is so true. It's one, just being really stubborn and hard-headed. Completely agree with that. Finding the right allies, and then just being willing to put it out there. And I've brought this up in other episodes with people as well, but I always find it a bit comical when people just keep things to themselves because, what if somebody takes this idea, or what if they're going to judge me? And
It's comfortable.
Just drop that what if, and it is uncomfortable, but
Yes.
the power of putting things out there, even just saying, hey, one day I want to be the CEO of a company.
Yes.
You don't need to know right now what company that is. You don't need to know what cause or mission that's going to be, but just saying that's what I want to be one day.
Yeah.
And proudly proclaiming it not only to the public, but also to yourself.
Absolutely.
Incredibly powerful. So
Yeah.
I definitely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
There.
And I also like to encourage, especially young girls or also young boys, be daring. Like, have a polite, daring attitude. And if you think, oh, that person is too high up, I cannot reach out, I cannot, just do it. They're at the end of the day, chances that they're going to be very nice to you, that they are going to be really happy to help, are actually very high. And I think we sometimes underestimate that. So if anyone wants to reach out, just reach out. That's how I've done it. Yeah. And I've actually never made a bad experience. Maybe I already forgot, but mostly made very good experiences with that.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's also the same for me. And I know when I was interviewing like founders in the past, they all also said the same thing. You'd be surprised how open people are.
Yes.
And if anything, remember, people like to feel like they're an expert. People like to, feel like they know things. So most of the time, people are really excited to talk to you and share their knowledge about something. I think typically the biggest hurdle you'll probably have is trying to find a time to catch them, because most of these people are quite busy and have lives and everything. Yeah. But yeah, I agree with you on that. And so with that as well, because we're getting towards the end of the conversation, I also wanted to ask you, what are your hopes for the future of the organization, the industry, and everything that's going on with the farmers as well?
Mm-hmm. So my hopes are actually that, first of all, that we get more visibility for the fact that the concept of giving the power back to producers is the right way to go. It's the way to say we value the fact that you create this moment for us to go out with a friend, have a coffee, to sit at the office, have a coffee. So creating that and having that mindset shift as well through the visibility that we're creating, that's one thing that I really like to see happen. And then also what I mentioned earlier, that we acknowledge that when we're standing in the supermarket, we're not the most important part of the value chain. We are a very important part of the value chain, but not the only most important part. And so once we know that, and we know that there's actual people who have friends and families as well, sitting or standing behind that, I think that's the point where we can start looking into it. And looking into it doesn't have to be a battle. It doesn't have to be very hard. Yeah. It can be as much as just asking ChatGPT, just asking someone who knows, just listening to a podcast like this one, or reaching out to a company and asking them. So just asking the right questions. And then there is some sort of tricks, knowing the concept of fair chain. You can Google fair chain chocolate, fair chain socks, fair chain anything, fair chain coffee. Yeah. And once you just start with the right question, and you can use that as your hack and go from there. That's something that I would also like to give people as some food for thought. And just remember that there's not such thing as a regional coffee or a regional roastery. Just spread the word around that.
Very loud and proud about that. We're going to be. Yeah.
Exactly. And just think about that there's people who are responsible for making sure that we have our food and our coffee and having the respect for that.
Well, there you have it, folks. It's the power of community, collaboration, and frankly, don't underestimate your purchasing power. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, leave a comment or review. Also, be sure to follow On the Up and Up on your favorite podcast streaming and social media channels to stay up to date on the latest. Thank you all for tuning in for this conversation. Thank you, Maura, for all of your insights into the coffee industry, your background, and amazing advice. And of course, thank you to our wonderful partners at Factory Network for supporting On the Up and Up. And with that being said, onwards and upwards, y'all, and I'll speak to you soon.